Welcome, welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Morning.
Thank you. So we're still riffing on this statement in the Torah about how God says "v'nivruchu v'cha," right? And in other words, where He says, "v'nivrucha v'cha kol mishpachot האדמה," all the families of the earth will be blessed through you. So we have really a lovely particular riff here. Amar Rabbi Elazar, said Rabbi Elazar, my dichtiv, what do we mean when it's written, v'nivrechu v'cha kol mishpachot ha'adama, when it says, and he uses this word v'nivrechu, right, which we take translating from the word bracha to mean a blessing, right, will be blessed through you, all the families of the earth. But Rabbi Elazar is playing on the word v'nivrechu, as we will see. Amar le HaKadosh Baruch Hu Avraham, said the Holy One, blessed be He, to Abraham, Shtei brachot tovot yeshli. I believe that it's saying two good blessings, and I'm going to translate it as that. I have two in mind. Lehavrich. Do you see the play on the words? And lehavrich means to graft, that I'm going to graft these two blessings through you, through you. Who are these two blessings? Ruth HaMoavit, Ruth the Moabite, Naama HaAmmonite, and Naama the Ammonite. So interesting, right? Um, First of all, of course, that they are not, right? They did not come from the Jewish people. They were not descendants of Israelites. They actually turn out to be Moab these were Lot's, came from Lot, Abraham's cousin. Yes. I'm trying to think, yes. Um, so the fact that they were grafted on, and I think that there's actually a lot of symbolism on this, and the idea that it isn't just a question of blood, that is to say, that having the blessings of of Torah and this relationship that we're supposed to have and develop with our divine creator isn't just for the Jewish people. That there were, when he said this, because he mentions the families of the earth, right? The implication is beyond Abraham and his descendants. So I think that's part of what's being said here in this point. But how lovely, here's an example of where they talk about how many ways the words of Torah can be interpreted, and how we have this particular interpretation, mining out, right, what the word bracha, or the root bet resh chaf can mean. So let's take a look at the Torah Tamima on this. It would appear that diyek halashon v'nivruchu, that he was concentrating on this word v'nivruchu, de lefi pshuto, because the fact that it uses this form v'nivruchu will be bruchim, right? De lefi pshuto, because if we wanted to understand this word to mean will be blessed, right? Havale lemar, it should have written something differently. It should have expressed the hit barchu, right? They will become blessed. That would have made that form of this root would have been, if all it had meant was that that they would be blessed, right? That is the form of the word that it should have taken in the Torah. But it doesn't. It says v'nivrechu. So that's why Rabbi Elazar feels impelled to give it this additional layer of meaning. Ukamo dichtiv besof parshat vayera, right? And it's similar to what is written, right, at the end of Parshat Vayera. That would be sorry, I'm trying to Vayera would be in the parsha it's in the book of Genesis. Okay, Vayera is in Exodus. Vayera is a different parsha in Genesis. Udarish, okay, and it's explained, it's interpreted v'nivrechu, right? That this word v'nivrechu, we've got the same word again, milashon mavrich et hagefen, right? It has the meaning of one who grafts a vine. And in Jastrow, he explains that in that particular, to graft the vine here means to bend a vine branch into the ground so as to create a new and independent vine. But essentially, the word mavrich has this understanding of to graft, right? So. And that's in Tractate Kilayim. That's in the Mishnah. Kilayim deals with the laws of being forbidden to mix certain different species together, certain seeds, and especially it affects agricultural laws about planting things together, especially involving vines. Okay, right. Darish, and there it explains, Ruth Naomi, or he explains that we're referring to Ruth and Naama. Sorry, I said Naomi. I meant Naama, different person. Shiatsu mehen malachim v'nevi'im, because out of them there were kings and prophets. Meirut, we know that Ruth was the great-grandmother of David HaMelech, no less a personage than David, King David. Umi Naama, okay, and Naama, imo shel Rehovam. She was the mother of Rehovam, one of that's, we're talking about the person who was Solomon's son and followed him in the kingship. Yatsa Asa. Rehovam wasn't such a nice person, but from Rehovam descended Asa, King Asa, Yehoshaphat, Chizkiah, Hezekiah, Yeshayahu Hanavi, and Isaiah the prophet. They all descended ultimately from Naamah. So here were two women who were not originally of the stock of Israel, but that, in a sense, that God was predicting to Abraham this particular and beautiful and profound idea that there were those who were not going to be of his descendants, that God was going to graft to him. So I think it's a lovely, very thoughtful drash. Excuse me 1 second. Okay. Kol mishpachot ha'adama. So all the families of the earth. Families of the earth. Amar Rabbi Elazar. Again, Rabbi Elazar said, okay, Mai dichtiv v'nivruchu v'cha kol mishpachot ha'adama. What do we mean, right? That we use this term v'nivruchu, through you, all the families of the earth. Afilu mishpachot hadarot ba'adama, right? So that he's saying what it means is that even those families that live in the earth, ein mitbarchot, see this itbarchu, right? This form of are not blessed except on account of the Jewish people. So this is going to beg interpretation clearly, right? So what do we mean by this? Okay, let's take a look. Find it here. Lo nitba'er. doesn't explain. Miva mahem mishpachot hadarot ba'adama. He's saying it doesn't explain this particular there or there. It doesn't tell you. What are we talking about? When we're talking about people who live, right? Dar is like it's also related to the word lagur, right? To actually inhabit, right? To inhabit the earth. V'halo kol ha'olam darim ba'adama. Because the truth is, the entire world, right, lives on the earth or in the earth, however you want to understand it. Ukamo shehikshu kahai gavna b'Shabbat. And we have a similar, this expression raises a similar challenge in Masechet Shabbat, the Perek Pei Aleph, on page 85a. Al halashon yoshvei haaretz, where there it refers to who inhabit, right, who dwell in the earth. Atu, that's a question mark, an interrogative. Kule alma. He's saying, well, don't all the earth, doesn't everyone? Sorry, question. You mean to say it has to say those who dwell on earth? You mean the entire world, Yoshvei Rakiahem? You mean the whole world lives in heaven? We might think that the world lives in heaven, that it has to tell us that they live on earth? Why are you saying something that's so obvious? Why this expression? Right? Yen Sham, and you can look at it. Ulefanenu, and ahead of us, Sof Parshat Vayishlach. At the end of Parsha Vayishlach, that's the one about where Jacob and Esau meet up again. Right at the end of that Parsha, right? It makes some comment regarding this, and we'll talk about it there. Tartamima will bring it down there. V'nir'eh, and it would appear, so this is how he understands it. It would seem, deka'eh al kol mishpachot ha'ba'alei chayim, okay, that what it's talking about is all the families of living creatures, shehem darot al ha'adama mamash, that they live on the earth itself, right? They actually live on the earth. V'chein matzina belashon chazal, and likewise we find and we'll have to understand exactly what he's meaning by that. But he says ba'alei chayim. So ba'alei chayim refers to animals as well, means all living creatures. So that maybe when it says the families of the earth, we'll have to see, we'll have to clarify. But at this particular point, he could be meaning, Torah Tamima could be meaning that we're talking about all living creatures, not just human beings, right? Okay. V'chein matzinu b'lashon chazal, and we find similarly in the language that is used by the rabbis, dekaru lebehemot v'chayot, that they refer to cattle and animals, gidulei karka. They say gidulei karka means they grow from the ground. Now gidulei karka usually we'd understand to mean crops, right? Trees, vegetation. But the rabbis sometimes refer to animals as well as gidulei karka, because certainly when it comes to cattle, right, they eat grass, etc. And certainly even the carnivores depend on the animals that eat grass. So ultimately, they also have to depend on vegetation, right? So that's where he's getting this from. So that mishpachot ha'adama doesn't just mean human beings. It also means animals as well. Eruvin, this is a reference, he gives you the reference itself, in Eruvin, Tractate Eruvin, page 27, B, Uvekama Makomot, and other places as well. Gam yesh lomar. So mishpachot ha'adama we can understand as meaning all living creatures, right? We'd understand it that way. V'gam yesh lomar, and one could also say deka'e al par'e adam, that it may be referring to wild human beings that live in what I think he's referring to, like uncivilized would be perhaps the best way I could just to translate this world. Hashochvim, they inhabit benikike haslaim. These people are cave dwellers. In other words, people with whom, there's no trace of civilization. They're simply human beings. I mean, there are some people living in places, I believe, in Asia, certain places in Asia, that live in a very primitive kind of way. And these people, and because they live in the clefts of the rocks, Ukunomo, and similar places. In other words, they don't build houses and things like that. They don't have that kind of civilization. They're basically cave dwellers. The Darish Kane, okay, and we can explain it this way. Midalo Kativ. Here's the interesting thing. Why are we going to this extent to find these kinds of meanings to this blessing that God gave Abraham? Why don't we just mean it's a nice little metaphor for human beings? And again, there's an approach to the Bible in its examination that says if there's another way of expressing it, and we just had an example of it, right? Because it says v'nivrechu and not hitbarchu, right? So it's an approach to interpreting the Bible and mining out further meanings, subtle meanings, because if it just simply wanted to say what we're taking it at face value, it would there are better ways for Hebrew to express itself. And it doesn't say kol goyei haaretz. It doesn't say all the nations of the world. This blessing doesn't say all the nations of the world will be blessed through you, which is the way we've been taking it. But because it says Mishpachot Adama, we are going further than that, right? Kilashon hapasuk sof parshat vayera, and at the end the of Parsha Vayera, right? This is the Parsha. This is the next Parsha after Lech Lecha, right? It talks about Goyei Haaretz. There it does say the nations, the peoples of the earth. Okay. V'hit barchu bezaracha. It says that he's quoting it. V'hit barchu bezaracha, and will be through your seed will be blessed. Kol goyei haaretz, all the nations of the world. Does anybody have any comments before we wander further into this? So, just I hope you can sense this wonderful approach to looking more deeply into the words of the Torah. So, all right, so we've got there. Take a look at the sentence we've got. So we're looking at pasuk Hey, right? Vayikach Avram et Sarai ishto. Abram took Sarai his wife, ve'et Lot ben Achiv, excuse me, and Lot his brother's son, in other words, his nephew, right? Ve'et kol rechusham, and uh, all their property, right? Asher rachashu, which they had acquired. Ve'et hanefesh, and the soul, asher asu b'charan, that they made in Haran. That phrase is, again, a phrase that just screams for explanation. And the way it's expressed, right? Because on a very pshat level, we could say, in other words, the servants, right, or the slaves that they had acquired. That is a very pshat way of looking at this. In other words, they had acquired they had acquired slaves, and they took the slaves along with them. But it says asher asu, which they made, right? The souls that they made in Haran. That's translating the Hebrew literally. I'll just finish up the sentence. Vayetzu lalechet artzaknan, and they left to journey to the land of Canaan. Vayavohu artzaknan, and they arrived in the land Canaan. So we're going to have to take a look at this. Here we go. The et hanefesh, and the souls. Tana de Be Eliyahu. So there is a midrash actually called Bei Eliyahu, but this is referring to this is actually found in Avodah Zarah, the tractate Avodah Zarah in the Talmud, page 9a, right? And this is quote from the school of Eliyahu, Sheshet Alfei Shanim. Wait a second. Wait, wait, wait. Okay, I want to make sure. Right. Okay, here we go. Sheshet Sheshet Alfei Shanim Have Alma. So 6,000 years the world exists. 6,000. Shnei Alafim Tohu. 2,000 years of Tohu. Tohu sort of means uh, just sort of existence. It's just mixed up existence. It means that it's sort of void. It doesn't have any purpose, purposelessness, etc. Right? Let's go on. At least that's how I'm going to understand it here. Shnei alafim Torah, 2,000 years of Torah. Shnei alafim Yemot HaMashiach, and 2,000 years of the Messianic days. Ume amat. Okay, so now the question. Wait a second. It's made a statement, right? What's the evidence? Ume am amat havu shnei alafim Torah. And from what point did the 2,000 years of Torah begin, come into existence? Min ve'et hanefesh asu b'chara. It came from the point when it says, and the souls which they made in Haran. So we're not going to be able to get through all of this today because he has a lot to say about this, as we will see. Okay, take a look. All right, right here, nismach. It is depending Alma shetigem unculus. If we look at the Aramaic translation of that phrase, we see that unculus, our Aramaic translator, translates the et hanefesh asher asu de sheibdu leoraita. That when it says the souls that they made, it means that he converted them to Judaism, to the Torah. Oraita is the Aramaic word for Torah. In other words, they had converted in Haran that they took along with them. People who now appreciated and lived their lives according to Torah, which on a basic level means in connection to the divine creator, that one is living one's life in that relationship, because the Torah itself starts a process of defining what that relationship, the terms of that relationship. So that's why we look at what Onkelos understands, the nefesh ashur asu, the souls which they made. Now, I believe, I don't think this is anything new that I'm saying, that the idea is that in practicing Torah, in absorbing Torah, a person achieves immortality. That Torah allows a human being to achieve that in the course of their lifetime. So that it's interesting. There's a major issue, which is the light switch part, which is, do you accept Torah or don't you accept Torah? And if the answer is you do accept Torah, then the question is, okay, how do you show you do? How do you practice it? How do you take it seriously? But I believe that that's what it's all about. And of course, more recently, I came to the realization that the arcane laws of ritual purity are directly concerning the way in which one acquires immortality. They are directly connected to that. And once you understand it in that way, a lot of the attention given to it, etc., through Jewish law and the Mishnah, etc., you start to understand why. Okay. So going on. So just to review, the Nefesh Asher Asu, we're talking about people they converted to Judaism. Uma shekatav shnei alafim tohu. And that's first 2,000 years, which are described as tohu. I would say maybe purposelessness. Ein hakavana tohu mamash. It doesn't mean that the world was just this blur of existence. It existed just pretty much physically the way it does, as it does now. It's not referring to, prehistoric times and what was going on and the shifting of the continents and all that. It's not talking about that, right? Mamash means actual tohu. Ifshar, we have to say this is impossible. Why? Shahare achare dishne alafim hashniyim. The reason we're going to say that that's impossible is because after the second 2,000 set of 2,000 years, matchilim mimei Avraham. Sorry, right? Okay, that starts. In other words, the second set of 2,000 years starts after Abraham's days, after the days of Abraham. Imkain, and if they're starting after the days of Abraham, Imkain, if that's the case, Halo gam ad Abraham haya haolam miyushav, right? So the world was certainly inhabited. So maybe Tohu means uninhabited. Okay, maybe that's a good way to translate as we're studying this, getting a better fix on what we mean by tohu, uninhabited. That would be a good way. But we know that the world was, in fact, inhabited, right? I mean, that's right there in front of us, all these chapters that we've done up to now. Ella, however, hakavana, the intention of describing those 2,000 years as years of tohu, de la umat hashnei alafim hashniyim, that in contrast to the second set of 2,000 years, de bahem mitchilat kufat Torah, that in those 2,000 years, the Torah, the time period of Torah begins. Heve hazman hakodem lo, if you're going to compare it to the time that preceded Torah, lo hakodem lo, which precedes it, nechshav latohu, to all intents and purposes, it's uninhabited. People are just existing. People are just surviving, right? There's no real purpose to their existence in comparison to the second 2,000 years, excuse me. The Balor Torah, because when you don't have Torah, Ein Yitron Adam al Habima, there's no distinction between human beings and cattle. In other words, when you live simply to survive, right? Or to become powerful, or simply to procreate, right? What difference really is there between human beings and the rest of the animal kingdom? There's no distinction. The ein ze chashuv yishuv haolam kedarush, and that is not considered the habitation of the world as is. Darush maybe is expected, as required, something like that there. So I'm going to stop here, and next time we pick up Torah Mima, I'm hoping we'll continue, as I said, because what he is going to do is he actually cares enough to get into the calculation of the 2,000 years as to how you actually get that calculation. So a lot of what he has to say, and here is cheshbon, the calculation, right? He does very carefully, so we can figure out how they get these 2,000, 2,000, 2,000. So I'm going to stop the share here. Okay. Again, we're still on the record, so if you have anything you'd like to share for this, please feel free. Yeah. Mead?
Yes, well, I just lost my picture, but anyway, let
Okay.
me see if I can
We
bring
still see you.
myself back. Hang on, there we go. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I, have been studying over the years with Rabbi Grunfest in Akron, Talmud, And one of the area, I'm sort of the curmudgeon who raises, from a certain perspective, okay, what's their method? What is the method to their madness, if you will, in interpretation?
Mhm.
And to me, the first thing that strikes me is that it's all interpretation. Okay, and different layers are there. Talmud is interpretation, Torah Tamima is interpretation upon interpretation, Rashi is interpretation upon interpretation. But if you get back to the actual Torah itself, the difficulty with requiring the interpretation is the limit of the language. And the question that I've asked of Rabbi Grunfast, and I've tried to ascertain, is how many unique words are there in the Torah? And the number that I wouldn't attribute it to him, but I've heard is somewhere in the 6,500, 7,000 different words. And that, of course, leaves everything open to what does this word or that word mean, because many different meanings are assigned to a given word with that sort of limitation. And to have some perspective on what let's say, a 7,000 word vocabulary has on the ability to express highly complex thoughts, the average 5-year-old has about a 5,000 word vocabulary. The average 10-year-old has at least a 10,000 word vocabulary. So, what we are seeing is in the Torah a written explanation containing all of the knowledge, all of the answers in the language that we'll say a 5 or 6-year-old would have at his command. And that's the nature of the written language. And so what we see here is successive generations of interpreters having to try to ferret out the meaning. And it's to me a fascinating process, but I have to look back on what is driving that to begin with. And it's primarily the inherent, I hate to say limitations of the Torah, but the limitations of the vocabulary that necessitate this approach. And what comes out of it is layer upon layer upon layer of explanation. So that's kind of the way that I look at this. I think that's great. I think that the insights are marvelous. But the question is what led to that and what continues to lead to that. So that's just my you can react, you can take it apart, but that's
I would
so
like to respond. I don't know about
yes,
reacting, but I'd
please
like to.
do.
Okay. I think that if you wanted to summarize the entire work and operation of the rabbinic tradition, it is a response to taking very, very seriously the commandment, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might.
Sure.
And I don't know if you had a similar experience to me, but when I was much younger and I fell in love and I got a letter from my lover, I didn't just read the letter once. I read it many times in the attempt to try and squeeze out every meaning I could get, every nuance that I could get from that letter. And if we use the metaphor that the Torah is a love letter that God sent the Jewish people, we understand why they're doing what they're doing. Language
Yes.
in and of itself is an approximation. It is actually a mapping of thought. And data is data, but interpretation of data is reality.
I agree with you.
And so, if you want to understand the various approaches that have created an absolute magnificent ocean of information, This is what basically leads to it, is taking seriously the idea of loving God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. The truth is, of course, our ability, everything, if we start to try to grapple with what we mean when we talk about the conception of a divine creator, okay? If we really try, don't simply think that all of reality that we experience to the degree of the tiny little piece that we're conscious of, right, is more than simply the physical universe or the universe that is subject to scientific experimentation. It allows us then to move on and expand our understanding of the purpose of life. Science doesn't answer, it's not intended to answer for me why Mordecai Miller even exists. It may explain Mordecai Miller's existence through the combination of a sperm and an egg, and it may explain it through the DNA and all those various things, but it only explains my empirical existence. But it doesn't give me a reason to exist.
Sure. And then, but then
That is
another,
why, by the way,
right,
and
right.
this is the reason
Yes.
why I correlate the number of increased numbers of suicides and numbers of depressed individuals because of the abandonment and the ignorance regarding to the question of, well, okay, and I just saw this on Facebook, right, where they're quoting, I'm trying to think, Stephen Hawkins, right, who admittedly is a brilliant, was a
Was.
brilliant person, brilliant scientist, brilliant philosopher, who explains that the reason why everything exists is gravity. But Stephen Hawkins doesn't ask the question, well, how did gravity come about? And the very fact that gravity operates in the way that it does, is
And
there some
yeah,
cause that goes beyond the system that we're examining now? Doesn't think that that's a legitimate question, doesn't feel that's a legitimate question. And I do. And the reason I thoroughly believe in a divine component to this world, for want, struggling for vocabulary, is because that's so obvious. I have to say, I didn't give myself a brain. I didn't give myself my basic raw intelligence. Did I hopefully take my life and develop it in the various things, the schools I went to, the people I spoke to, the experiences I tried to learn from, the books I read, all those sorts of things. But the very ability to do that didn't come from me.
okay. And what I think that leads to, and I'm not being critical, I agree with you.
You should
It,
be
it
critical.
no, well, but
Yeah.
it leads inevitably, I think, to mysticism
Yes,
as an
yes.
effort to understand the unexplainable.
Yes, if you want to call it mysticism, if you do. I think mysticism I see more as a discipline, a specific kind of discipline. But if you simply, you can also simply say that the very notion of believing in God is mysticism. Who am I to argue with you?
No,
But the truth is
yeah,
that mysticism I find more theoretical. But I don't feel that what I'm saying to you right now about the understanding of a transcendent component to reality is mysticism. Now, if I wanted to express it in mystical terms, I would say that the reason the world exists is, and this is mystical, it's from mystical tradition, exists in the mind of God. That the reason why we exist, to put it a different way, is because God is thinking us, because God is conscious of us. And the truth is that if you look at the Hebrew of Genesis chapter 1, the word Amar, which is classically translated as said, okay, actually means to think. You can find many, many cases where the word amar cannot mean to say, which is a semi-physical,
Mhm.
activity, and means think. Now let's translate Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God thought, let there be light, and there was light.
Yes.
And all those places where it uses that verb amar to translate it as think or
And
thought.
we get back to the issue, question of the vocabulary.
Yeah,
That's where it ends. That's where it starts and ends.
right. But the fact that vocabulary is, you know, limited to a specific, that you can count the number of words, doesn't limit the vocabulary, because the vocabulary itself is an approximation.
Sure.
And that allows now an expansion of meaning well beyond the specific words that you count.
Yeah. I'm just looking at the process
Right. Well, the process is
and what comes out of it.
it's generated by love,
Mhm.
by the
Very good.
intellectual application of loving. Most people confuse love with lust. And yes, love is an appetite. But appetites are interesting because appetites can promote life and appetites can destroy life.
It's a limit on the Zoom.
Yeah, well, no, I don't, he doesn't have a limit on it. But
Oh,
but by the way, did you see jumping of the script during the scripture?
yes, it was flickering a bit.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay. I just want to make sure my phone wasn't.
No, I'm on an iPad and it did the same thing.
Yeah, I'm on an iPhone, so I was just like, is it time to get a new one? So anyway,
Always a time to continue.
well,
There you
you
are, you're
know,
unfrozen.
Thou shalt upgrade.
yeah, well, it was the flicker. I don't normally see when you're presenting text. It's not normally like flickering or jumping every about 10 seconds, right? So it was pretty
Yeah.
consistent.
Oh,
So
well, I'm sorry if maybe it's my need for an upgrade.
no, it's you just got a new laptop. If I remember, anyway, it doesn't matter. So
So, by the way, we're still on the record. You know that.
yeah,
Yep.
we know. We're just asking.
All right. So, I'm going to call it a day for this.
Okay, great.
I'm going to take it